now. I know there's a lot of things going on this week, so we're really glad that you can join us for our weekly Meet the Artist series, where we host visiting and local artists. Today it's a visiting artist, Jade Doskow. Before we get started, I just want to mention that we have released all of our summer workshops. We got a lot of cool stuff on the horizon, and we just today launched for the next 24 hours. We're giving away the last spot to we're raffling off the last spot to a sold out workshop of Raymond Meeks. So if you are interested, if you're watching online, if you're here, if you repost our thing to your stories, our Instagram post to your stories, and tag a friend, you will be entered into the raffle. I think that's it for now. I'm going to get started. New York-based architectural and landscape photographer Jade Doskow is known for her rigorously composed and eerily poetic images that examine the intersection of people, architecture, nature, and time. Doskow is best known for her work Freshkills, Lost Utopias, and Red Hook. The monograph of the Lost Utopias series was published in 2017 by Black Dog London. Doskow holds a BA from the NYU's Gallatin School and MFA from School of Visual Arts. She is the subject of the 2021 documentary, Jade Doskow, Photographer of Lost Utopias. The film has screened internationally at film festivals and at cultural institutions such as the Asheville Art Museum and the International Center for Photography. Doskow's photographs have been featured in the New York Times, VQR, Urban Omnibus, Architectural League of New York, Aperture, Photograph, Architect, Wired, Musée Mag, Smithsonian, Slate, and Newsweek Japan. Doskow is on the faculty of the School of Visual Arts and the International Center for Photography, both in New York. Recent and current exhibitions include at the Museum of Modern Art, Asheville Art Museum, Alice Austin House, Tracy Morgan Gallery, and Cornell University. Doskow is a contributing environmental photojournalist to the New York Times and is the photographer-in-residence of Freshkills Park, New York City. Can we give a warm welcome to Jade? Thank you.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much to CPW for hosting me this evening. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's such a great organization and such an exciting part of this part of New York City. As Sarah described, I've been working closely with Freshkills Park in New York City, and that's mostly what I'll be sharing with you today. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. There we go. And I'm also going to share a few other projects that led up to my work at Freshkills and that are related in spirit. So when I was a young photographer getting started in Brooklyn, I was working as a bicycle messenger and just exploring the city a lot and kind of finding what was my photographic interest as I was taking my first classes at NYU. These explorations led me to Red Hook, Brooklyn, which is where I currently live once again. And what was interesting to me in Red Hook was the proximity to Manhattan while still having this sense of great expansiveness, very low buildings, a big sky, yet there was Manhattan right across the water. This was an early picture from the Red Hook series showing this kind of rubble-strewn lot with a view toward Lady Liberty. This is now a parking lot for a grocery store and also for very expensive loft units in the building behind me. Another very early picture from Red Hook, just a vacant lot reflecting light. But again, thinking about this kind of expansive feeling within this urban lot, this urban place. Nature was also catching my attention and how nature could thrive within the city. This particular, I'll wait for that. When I moved to Red Hook, much of the neighborhood was abandoned, meaning the waterfront blocks anyway. And I, in fact, lived in the building you see to the right of this image, and this was my neighbor, this ivy-covered building. I'll give that a second, too. I studied the building for years, and then one day while I was out shooting, I came across it kind of glowing with this ivy cascading down. I said, this building is in its prime. It's time to make a photo. So it took about 3 years for me to really get to this point that it was time to make the photo. So just thinking about urban space, green, nature, openness, all of these things were consistently in my mind. And in my childhood, everybody always thinks, well, why do you do anything, right? As an artist, why do you do the things you do? And I grew up with 6 acres of land, which feels, very sumptuous in New York City. Lots of nature. But then I'd come and visit my grandmother in the Bronx overlooking the end of the subway with graffiti all over it. So I always had these 2 different points of view inspiring me, even as a child. And here's another overgrown lot in Red Hook that felt like a meadow to me, even if it was strewn with garbage. So in 2004, I was traveling in Spain and came across the 1992 World's Fair site, which inspired my next 12-year project, Lost Utopias. Lost Utopias is also about public urban space. It's about World's Fair sites and the architecture, public art, and landscaping that are left behind once World's Fairs close. And while America has not hosted a fair for many years, the upcoming fair will be in Saudi Arabia. Recent ones have been hosted in Spain, Italy, Kazakhstan, and South Korea. So really, America is the country that's doesn't feel they have anything to prove or gain in these events. Looking at the World's Fair sites, I was looking at public urban space and often what was chosen to be repurposed or not repurposed, abandoned or not abandoned, or turned into a tourist site. This is the site from the Chicago Columbian Exposition. Oh, and these are Victorian toilet buildings left behind in Philadelphia. This is the site where I originally had the idea, the 1992 Expo site in Seville. And this is the environmental pavilion. So very much looking at architecture specifically. And now in retrospect that I'm working on a large landscape project, I think of architectural work as very object-based. It's this 3-dimensional form in space that you must assess and figure out how the lighting works and how it exists with its environs. This is the 1967 site in Montreal. Buckminster Fuller's geodesic dome with an experimental student's house in the foreground. And this is from Seattle, the Seattle Science Center from 1962. If any of you can see this facade on the lower right, does that look familiar to anybody? Down here? No. So this facade was actually the prototype for the Twin Towers in New York City, designed by Minoru Yamasaki. And, like so many New Yorkers, we all have some tie, right, to the Twin Towers falling if you live there or have some other connection. So I always think of this photograph as a memoriam to the Twin Towers. And then in New York, in Flushing Meadows, the site that I return to most frequently features the New York State Pavilion, designed by Philip Johnson, not a typical Philip Johnson building. And over the span of time I was working on this project, about 12 years, I witnessed this particular building going from complete abandonment to restoration, and now it's being actively worked on. So the project was kind of infinite in that each site was kind of its own organism that was changing over time, depending on interests of the city, funding, all these kinds of things. So after I published the book of Lost Utopias, I wouldn't say I was actively looking for a new project, but I was kind of thinking, as open to something. And all of the big projects that I embark upon just organically fall into my lap, you could say. So first, I just want to talk about the idea of what we think of landscape and wilderness, these words. So landscape is from the Dutch word landschap, and it has specifically meaning pertaining to a framed view of a landscape. So landscape is a contained view of wilderness organized by the parameters of a painting. Or you could also think of it as wilderness, which is tamed and subjugated. And wilderness, this has a lot of really specific connotations, this word. And the general understanding is it's an uninhabited region, uncultivated by humans, untouched and pure. And working on a landscape project, I'm looking at all kinds of things. So I thought I'd share some of my inspirations and conceptual bents as I'm working. So first, thinking about the Hudson River School of Painting, and here we are in the heart of the Hudson Valley, of course. And so here we have the famous Thomas Cole painting, The Oxbow from 1835, and also a view of the mountain pass called the Notch of the White Mountain. And, the idea, of course, with these is the godliness of nature, and then colonizers or settlers being able to subjugate that nature, right? We see the trees are felled here. We see somebody riding on a horse, and one can imagine a farmstead in this area right here, right? This is yours for the taking, beneath the glory of God. And then similarly, in the 19th century, we have the early westward expansion and Western Front landscape photographers such as Carleton Watkins. And in Watkins' photos, we see quote unquote untouched nature, right? We don't see any people, even though people have lived in America for thousands and thousands of years. So his pictures of the American West were very much for a certain audience. And of course, as visual artists and image makers, we always have to think, well, who is the audience? And another photo of Carleton Watkins, Yosemite Valley, from the best general view from 1866. And of course, he is lugging thousands of pounds of equipment to make these pictures. And there's a reason he made his name as the photographer of the American West of the 19th century. But it's very much set in that time. In our current age, there is the understanding that there are now destroyed landscapes and destroyed wilderness, but there can be beauty and hope in these strange, mutated environments as well. And I like to think of all of this in tandem with the industrial age and the rise of photography on one side, Carleton Watkins on one side, and then we come down the slope to today where we're dealing with climate change, we're dealing with really destroyed landscapes, the other side of the curve. Richard Misrach's work I've looked at for years, as I'm sure many of you have, especially his series looking at the Salton Sea. I was so inspired by this particular series. I myself visited the Salton Sea a couple of years ago, and it's really quite unlike anywhere I'd ever been. And of course, in Misrach's pictures, we have this beauty and this sublime nature of the photos, but it's an incredibly toxic body of water that cannot hold any life. And in fact, on the bottom right, we see dead tilapia. And another photo from the Salton Sea. And Robert Adams is another photographer I look at very frequently. And his pictures, of course, are quiet, but they're also really loud in looking at how we've devastated the American landscape. And, I think that subtlety in his work has always really stuck with me. And then moving forward, just thinking about other artists that have worked with sites of sanitation and garbage. In the 70s, land artists frequently would address these issues. Gordon Matta Clark took his truck out to the mounds of the Freshkills landfill and had it demolished and tossed about by big machines. It was very, very macho. And Agnes Dennis, on the other hand, went down to the landfill in Battery Park City and planted a wheat field to bring attention to ideas about fertility and economic prosperity and food scarcity, things like that. So this is all to bring you to my main body of work right now, which is Freshkills. So how many of you know what Freshkills is? Few people. Okay. So Freshkills was at one time the world's largest household waste dump. It sits in the middle of Staten Island, and it's 2,200 acres, which by New York City terms is gigantic. I know out in the Midwest or somewhere else, not so big, but New York City is a land poor city and 2,200 acres is really big. It was opened in 1948 under Robert Moses because the city had a trash problem, just like today. And Robert Moses offered the Staten Islanders, he said, this will just be for 3 years. But, Moses wasn't always maybe quite honest with the public. And the 3 years turned into 53 years. 53 years of all of the 5 boroughs' garbage going to Staten Island. At one point, there were millions of tons of garbage out on the site. Supposedly, you could see it from space, things like that. So it's really this notorious part of the city. In the 90s, finally, Giuliani and Bloomberg and the city's administration decided it was time to close this site. And in 96, the last barge of garbage was brought out to Freshkills. The only time it was reopened was for the Twin Towers tragedy in 2001. And this was really controversial, but Freshkills had the space and the means and the equipment to actively go through the rubble from the Twin Towers. And so part of the site is now the actual burial site of the Twin Towers, and it's this really sacred portion of Freshkills. I didn't know too much about any of this. Like many New Yorkers, I did not have a driver's license, lived in Brooklyn, and didn't have a lot of reasons to go to Staten Island, except for taking the ferry to have a free ride here and there and enjoy the sea breeze. And because I had grown up visiting my grandmother in the Bronx, my only real experience of Freshkills was we would drive across Staten Island to get up to the Bronx, and we would go through those 440 and have to roll up the windows because it was really smelly and stuff was flying around. So that was my only real exposure to Freshkills. In 2018, I was teaching an SVA class looking at what I referred to as liminal green spaces, unusual green spaces, and so community gardens and green roofs, things like that. And into my research came what was going on at Freshkills. So I reached out to them, and they have a robust programming department in terms of educational groups. And so they said, sure, you and your tiny class of 5 students can come out and photograph. So me and my 5 students were picked up at the Staten Island ferry and then driven by a parks representative through Staten Island, and then let us out. And we were here. We were in this just incredible place. These shimmering meadow grasses in front of me, punctuated by methane wells and pipes sticking out. And it was just unlike anything I had ever seen, certainly within New York City. So almost immediately I said, oh, is there a photographer who's taken this on in a serious way to create an archive? And they said, well, we have people who come here and photograph, but not on that level. So I wrote them about a 10-page proposal, and then Parks and Sanitation approved my proposal after a few months to photograph the site for the next 10 years as the main artist partner in photography. Now, landscape photography is pretty difficult. I don't know if any of you have taken it on. But when you get to a large, expansive place, you're in a 360 space, right? 3-dimensional. And you have to know where to position yourself and what to focus on and how to deal with the light and what is the light striking and how is it shaping the land around you. All of these things. And this is actually a picture from my first shoot there in August 2018. And it was really, I consider this a tourist picture in a way because I was so new to the site. And so here we have these meadow grasses and phragmites. This is the William T. Davis Wildlife Refuge. And off in the city, you can see downtown Manhattan and the new One World Trade off in the distance. And in these first few months of work, it was really thinking about Hudson River School paintings and how to translate that onto this site. This one I call Landscape After Bruegel, thinking about the harvesters, but a different kind of harvesting because it's a harvest of garbage that lies beneath my feet. And sometimes it was just responding to light and the time of year shaping this place around me. And again, this feeling of great expansiveness. You would not visit this place and think, I'm in the middle of New York City. And another picture on a stormy day. So as I've been working out at Freshkills, I was thinking a lot about the history of how the landscape is represented, how the American landscape is represented, and also about the artists I was looking at. And I realized this was a completely different body of work than some of the projects I had been studying myself. Why? Because this is a subversion of landscape photography. This was a garbage dump, and it's being actively turned by humans into a landscape. It's not a real landscape. It's not a real wilderness. It's human engineered. So I thought this is fascinating because it's a subversion of what landscape photography is. As I've been working, there are so many micro moments within the landscape, such as this. These are called gabion barriers. And I guess I'll share a little bit what this place is comprised of. So it's comprised of 4 mounds, the north, south, east, and west. So you'll often hear me referring to the east mound or west mound, or whichever part of the site is in the picture. And each mound is many tons of garbage from 1948 through 1996. And it's all been essentially buried beneath many layers of infill and then sealed with a plastic impermeable layer to keep it all sealed. So it's essentially entombed. It's like our great pyramids of garbage. Above all of that and above that compression, soil has been brought in from around the country. This was all originally marshland. The marshes have long been tainted and filled with waste. So now this is a new place. This is a new grassland in the middle of Staten Island. And some of the soil that they bring in is very rich in iron. So for example, in this picture, we see iron stained water that has come down across this roadway. Many times I would just think, how do I represent such a complicated place, a place that was destroyed and now it is experiencing a kind of resurrection? This picture I call the new landscape, Freshkills, and we see an out-of-use dumpster reflecting the forest around it. After a few years of work, I'd been keeping it all top secret, just building the archive, trying to figure out what I was doing and just making a lot of work. So I thought, this seems like a great time to share the work in the Times because this is such a New York City site. So I partnered with the Times and we published this really beautiful 3-page spread with writing by Robert Sullivan, who had written about a similar site, the Meadowlands, and really highlighting how far this place that had such a terrible reputation had come and was coming. And over the last few years, I've been exhibiting the work and opening up conversations in places that really make sense for it. So this is in the Architecture, Art, and Planning Gallery at Cornell University. So a lot of the attendees of at this exhibition are people who are actively studying urban space and sustainability. And last year, we also showed the work as part of the Photoville Festival on the grounds of Alice Austin House in Staten Island. And what was nice about that was the grounds around Alice Austin House are public. So people who might not know too much about photography or art, they know about Freshkills if they're local Staten Islanders. So this was a really great opportunity for locals to really understand what was happening on site through these outdoor photos. And a few pictures out at work. So back to the archive. I think of this huge archive in terms of many different threads or themes or chapters. One of the themes are these big epic landscapes. Another theme or chapter are the systems behind the scenes. Again, this is a completely created site in terms of thinking of it in a wilderness term. And to enable this site to function, there is a leachate treatment plant, there's methane wells, there's a lot of active engineering work to enable it to continue successfully transitioning into a big park. This is the rooftop of the leachate treatment plant. Leachate is commonly referred to as garbage juice. It's the stuff that drips down below from garbage. And then it's treated for through many organic and inorganic processes until it is clean enough and approved by the EPA to go back into the New York waterways. So here's a few behind the scenes pictures in the leachate treatment plant. This is the workman storage room. And this is one of several laboratories around the site. And these are sludge blowers. This is the Veterans Avenue Laboratory. And some kind of a temperature recorder. I just thought this thing was so cute. And then this is just binders and binders of schematics for the leachate treatment piping that goes all around the 2,200 acres. And this picture gets such funny reactions because a lot of people say, oh, well, that just looks like the basement where I work, or, you know, it just looks like whatever. But a big part of this project is also just illuminating all of this work that we never think about, right? How many of you think about who picks up your garbage? How many of you think about where your garbage goes? These are all really hot topics, right? Today, anyway. And this is just an example of all of the work behind the scenes held in these binders to control and deal with New York City's garbage. Part of the site is also just the unpredictability of what I will find. This is a pile of wattles, which are used for irrigation control. And in photography, right, we never know what will happen. This was the day of a hailstorm, so the sky was just this immense color of cobalt blue. And it is indeed a surreal sight in many, many ways. This is the West Mound when it had recently been capped. So basically, it had just been sealed up, and they're going to bring in more dirt and put it on top of this black material and then plant on top of that. And I call this black landscape. The materiality used to create these meadows is important to show in the photographs as well. This is also on the West Mound, and here we see that's one of those wattles that you saw in that first picture. And then there's different materials here being used to plant the initial grasslands. So just thinking of this kind of immense task of creating a grassland from scratch. Not something you probably think about when you're at your local park. But there's a lot of work that goes into creating a meadow that never existed. And these are some more piles of material, probably sand barrier material. And we're looking directly west to the New Jersey Industrial Corridor. So New Jersey in places is only about 20 feet across the Arthur Kill from Staten Island. It's right there. And so while Freshkills is turned into a really beautiful, immense place, we still have air pollution and water pollution coming in from the New Jersey Industrial Corridor and everything else that comes down the Hudson and East Rivers. This is the West Mound. So this, again, is where the Twin Towers were brought, the rubble was brought. And the West Mound is the hugest part of the site at 545 acres. It's quite large. And it has this feeling that's quite powerful. It feels ancient and sublime. And the engineering structures add to that. So this is a irrigation control. I forget the name of this exact thing, but it's used for irrigation control. And it looks like this maybe Aztec pyramid or something, you know? So just this timeless feeling and this abstraction that could be found through the engineering on the site. This is a methane flare station. And here we can see the kind of Willy Wonka, right, with all these pipes and things, and then birds and the landscape beyond. And Freshkills is now quite fertile in terms of marine life, birds, mammals, and plant life. So pretty quickly, animals have come to the site, animals that necessarily weren't on Staten Island before. There are several very rare bird species that have come to the grasslands. So it's become quite an optimistic and positive transformation. Here are some dumpsters out of use with their own little mini ecosystems growing in there. Another chapter within the overall project are the specific waterfronts or beaches and kayak launches throughout the site, because waterways wend their way throughout. If I have a map, I'll show it to you all later. I think of the beaches as a battleground because, again, this is where things wash in from all over the place. They wash in from New Jersey. They wash in from the rest of the city. And so while the rest of Freshkills is so beautiful and having this rebirth, the waterways are where lots of stuff still finds its way. That being said, there are a lot of mussels, crabs, fish, and aquatic birds that have made the waterways their home once again, despite all of this. I also periodically just find things of interest on the site that I keep returning to. And I'm now entering my 6th year of being the photographer-in-residence at Freshkills. So I've seen a lot of parts of the site kind of change and morph over time. So not so dissimilar from the World's Fair project, where sometimes I would return to sites over the span of years. This is a salt pile, naked. It was wearing a black plastic cloak. And this, I kind of played with the large format camera and went with the vignette. So it looks like we're looking at another planet through a scope of some sort. Here it is wearing its black attire. And then the wind just stripped it off. The trees are also quite fascinating. So in 2005, there was a competition to design the site, and the winning landscape architecture firm was Field Operations. Field Operations are the same firm that have designed the High Line and Domino Park and other very famous public area spaces around the world. And they kind of went with this idea of it being wild, but not too wild, but also kind of hands-off, like let it flourish as it will. But there could not be trees. Trees can't be allowed to establish themselves because the roots can ultimately puncture the barrier protection materials beneath the soil. So sanitation several times a year has these giant mowers, and they mow the entire site to prevent any forests from establishing themselves. However, there are these survivors around the site, such as this tree, and you can see it's kind of growing laterally because there's not such a depth of soil to establish its root system. So this tree I often return to, and I've named it the fan tree because of its lovely form. And I'm shooting large format, so that's what it looked like on the glass. And some other trees, I call them all volunteer trees, since, again, they weren't planted. They were brought in by birds or by the wind. This one just had this amazing light and all of these crazy vines growing over it. And in the winter. And oftentimes the trees that survive are because they are right next to a methane well or a methane pipe, so the mower can't get right up next to it, and so they have the chance to spring up. This is one of the odder parts of the site. It's like this copse of Christmas trees. And after a while, I thought, I guess I can make some pretty pictures too of springtime meadows. And often I'm thinking about the topography of the site as well. The topography is pretty unusual. It's, again, mound-shaped, but all the mounds have different forms unto themselves. Like the east mound is long and low, and the west mound is really tall and huge, and they all have different forms. And topography can be very hard to show photographically because you're dealing with these undulations in the earth and unusual perspective. And somewhere as big as this, you can walk and walk and walk and walk and still not really understand what you're seeing. For that reason, I've been mostly shooting the project with a large format camera because that enables me to really mirror the topography and work with the perspective of the site and the perspective of my camera. And it also enables me to slow down and really understand what I'm witnessing. So this is the East Mound with these smaller methane bumps kind of along the surface of it. And this is an older picture of the West Mound. There is a boat graveyard with ships and boats from the 1940s that have just been dumped right off to the edge here. So off of the edge of West Mound, you can see these old out of use ships as well. I also think about the surface of Freshkills, what lies beneath, and the membranes and systems and layers that bridge what's beneath with the new materials, the new plants on top. This is a picture of a wattle that's kind of dissolving into the earth with the new grasses starting to grow around it. And I started to also think about Freshkills as a body in a way, a body with new skin over it and this new way of existing. So I call this picture wattle/suture. And then back into a bigger space here. And again, studying that unusual topography. Another aspect of the site reminds me of pictures of the Dust Bowl that I've seen and thinking about this denuded landscape. So this picture I call East Mound Dust Bowl, just because it looks so austere. It has that austerity that we think of in terms of how we destroyed the landscapes that comprise where the Dust Bowl happened, right? So thinking about these parallels in destruction of land and misunderstanding of how to use open space. And part of the site is the natural life that now inhabits it. And one day I came across this deer that had died on the West Mound. Freshkills is not yet open to the public outside of a very small and new part that's opened called North Park Phase 1. So if you drove out to Staten Island, you could visit the beautiful North Park Phase 1 that just opened this past fall. The rest of the site, however, is still controlled by sanitation. So it exists in this unusual limbo space between the closing of the landfill and the future wilderness park that will be open to the public. So it's open to programming. Lots of educational groups come and you can go kayak or bird watch with the Parks Department, but you can't just mosey onto the site. And what's been fascinating is everything's been designed as if to welcome visitors, but the visitors are yet to come. And so here on the West Mound, we have the observation point and this parking area that's at the peak of the West Mound. But it's really only can be used by sanitation right now. So who knows? I told my son, who's 13, I said, you're going to have to take on this project because I don't know when this will open. Could be 20 or 30 years. And one of the final pictures I'll share with you is just this beautiful, extraordinary light cascading across the site and illuminating the Staten Island Mall off in the distance. Part of what's really wild about Freshkills is just that it was this tremendously terrible place that was right up abutting residential neighborhoods, residential shopping areas. So it was right there. And in fact, in the mall, there's a wall of memories. And it's a really unusual wall of memories because all of the memories depicted relate to the landfill, relate to seagulls coming in and sniffing out the choice garbage. So it's a pretty unique place, the mall itself. This is one of the few wildlife pictures. I don't know how many of you have ever photographed with large format, but it's really hard to capture wildlife. Nearly impossible. There is a fox. Can we see it? Oh, my cursor is right there. There's a little fox face sticking out right there. That's my big Nat Geo moment right there. And another picture on the East Mound showing these gentle slopes and undulations. And a brackish waterway directly on the other side of a residential neighborhood. This I call asphalt constellations, just this, again, a very surreal moment out on the site. And this is the North Mound in winter. I really hope we get more snow. I love photographing out there in the winter. And people often have asked, oh, do you return to the same spot over and over to record something? But the thing is, there's a lot of arbitrary interference with the site, such as when is sanitation going to mow? They often mow at different times of year. So I never know if I can access a specific point on the site. And the snow gave me a whole other opportunity to witness the topography of the site because the meadow grasses were shorn and the snow kind of lays bare the actual shape of things. And so this is one of the few photos where you can really see this unnatural bulge that makes up the North Mound here. This is a very new picture called Prism Discharge. And this is a photograph in the height of summer showing many, many different plant species, native and non-native, invasive and non-invasive, all coming together in this fantastic overgrowth in Freshkills. And I'll finish with this picture. This is a memorial to the Twin Towers that was recently completed by sanitation. And this is the specific spot on the site of the West Mound where the buildings lie. Thank you.
What about the FDN line equipment that was crushed during 9/11? Is that on that same location?
I don't think so. I don't know the full details. I know some of those objects are with the museum downtown, but they wouldn't I don't think they would have been brought here.
I was wondering about the duration of this project as you're about halfway through it, kind of, I guess, 10 years. You mentioned in the beginning sort of two competing definitions of landscape, and I'm wondering how your understanding of those definitions has changed as you've been progressing through this, because it seems to me that the idea of nature and this being somehow unnatural or in conflict with that sense of it seems like you would start to lose that belief the more time you spend there.
Yes, very much so. And it's made me question a lot of things that are going on in the world and what's trendy right now in terms of invasive versus non-invasive species. I think these are all very temporary terms applied to plants and animals that have probably been in North America for a really long time. And so I find some humor in it now, if anything, because I look at Freshkills and I think, okay, so they have this special seed mix, but how far does it refer back to? The Pleistocene period? I mean, right? Like, when does this refer back to? When Native Americans lived there, they were controlling the landscape in their own way as well, right? So they were probably shaping what plants would grow where. And then white settlers came in the 1800s and they're doing their own thing. White settlers were dumping on this site because they thought marshes were useless as early as the 1700s and the 1800s. So it's really made me, also I should add, I moved up to the Hudson Valley in 2016 from the city. And now I've moved back, so I'm, in both places. But it made me look at the Hudson Valley really differently. I thought, well, how much of this is actually nature? None of it, really, right? None of it. So it made me really just put a big question mark on every aspect of nature I witness here in the American Northeast, especially. And to be, a lot of people have really strong feelings about Phragmites, for example. Does anybody know about the Phragmites? So they're non-native cattails essentially, and they're colonizers. When you see a stand of Phragmites, it's all one plant that is linked. So you'll see 50 or 100 or 1,000 stalks, and it's all one plant. So they're really hard to get rid of. But they grow really easily in polluted, marshy areas. So that's why once I started learning about Phragmites, I just realized they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous to the Northeast. So yeah, it's made me question how critical we are to naming certain flora and fauna as pests or invasive or anything like that, because I think Freshkills really represents the current time we're in terms of how we treat nature, how we treat the earth. It's highly imperfect, and that is the reality. You can't go back, right? So if anything, I've learned to embrace some of the plants that people consider pesty or terrible. I find beauty in them as well, and things change, right?
And have you talked to the people who are the scientists there, the people who
Mhm.
are planting grass
Mhm.
and see what the disjuncture between how the article perhaps talks about all this?
Yes, there are active biologists that work at Freshkills, so often I'm in touch with them, and sometimes I'm working with them on site together. And they're quite pleased with, especially the number of birds, the variety of bird species that have come to the site. So it's become quite a locus of study for researchers in that sense. And I think everybody's been pleasantly surprised with the abundance of natural life that has come to the site.
They look at your pictures and say, "That's this."
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Like this picture. I don't have the title in front of me, but I call it mugwort, honey locust, something, something. Because I said, "What's in this picture?" They gave me this giant list. It was so fantastic. So I listed some of. So the title of this is some of those plants, and then ... Yes.
Yes, so you said mugwort, right?
Hmm.
I remember like after I had my daughter, I had like water retention for like 2 years after.
Mm.
And someone referred mugwort actually and got rid of the excessive water. And like another plant that they say is like a weed
Hmm.
and they want to get rid of is planting. Or
Mm.
it's called like white man's footprint or something.
Okay.
So basically it's good for like pain, dental issues. And they grow like wild weeds all over the Hudson Valley. But it's medicine. So it kind of reminded me of that.
Definitely.
I love stuff like that. Or
Yeah.
even like dandelions, apparently you could like fry the head of it and like eat it. Or you could like boil it into tea for nutrition.
Yeah, dandelions have all kinds of great uses. Yeah, that's why I love this particular picture, because I think it feels to me like a celebration of all these plants that, yeah, some people say are pesty or whatever, but they do have all these fantastic uses and they feel so abundant, you know?
So do they encourage this type of growth there?
Oh, that's a great question. Part of my explorations have been to find the really untamed parts of the site, and that's what this is. So this was kind of down off the edge of a mound. On the other side of this thicket is the waterway. So this is an untouched. So I consider this the real wilderness on Freshkills.
Yeah, just like when I think about some parks that, like, I lived in New Orleans for 10 years, and so I came after Katrina and after like City Park, which to me was like, I mean, just stunning the way it was. Like, loved everything about like the overgrowth. You could go down these paths and just like, kind of like get hit, hide away in the park. And then there was people that were like, oh no, before, these golf courses, it was like all mowed, and it, like that's when it was good. And I'm like, no, this is perfect, like as it is. And so I'm wondering for them is like, what's success to them? Is it like a place that is like a big mowed lawn for like, people to come picnic, or is it a little bit of everything? Like when you find the Prospect Park, where we had someone come and show images where you're like, wow, I just think this is like somewhere in the South, like along a river, that's unkept. Yeah, what's to them? Do you have? Do they kind of let you in on what their full scope, their goals are? Is it a return to what was there before? Because you said they were planting things and creating creating this meadowland that was like never there before. But I thought at the beginning you said, like, when Moses, like, deemed this area or designated this area for the landfill, it was like currently, and what did you say? It was?
It was all marshland prior. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, I spend a lot of time with the Freshkills master plan, this big book, and it's a 30-year master plan. And,
How far are they in now?
I started developing it around 2005. And so just to give you a sense of the scale of such a project, so it's 2,200 acres and 22 acres is now open to the public. And it opened a few years later than it was supposed to. So, and I just started reading The Power Broker, which is giving me another insight just into how fast or slow city projects happen. And, thinking, and also through, I shoot a lot for the New York Times. And so I'm often traveling all over the city and really studying how different parts of the city change or don't change. And it's really, Manhattan is the center. It's the center of the world. And that's where the attention goes. And then as you go outward, less and less attention goes there, So that's why Williamsburg is a lot of money there, right? Domino Park. But then if you go out to the far Rockaways, that's where I just was, so I thought of that. There's not so much attention or money going there. And Staten Island is, in an uncomfortable position because it's always seen as the outlier of the 5 boroughs. It's a different political base. It's more suburban. It's hard to get there. All of these things get in its way of its success. And there's a hope that Freshkills will help bring Staten Island into the future. And, spending a lot of time out there, Staten Island is the least developed of the 5 boroughs. So arguably that's where the city has to go. There's nowhere left to fully develop in the other 4 boroughs. So I think of Staten Island as the borough of the future, and this is the park of the future. And who knows when they will both follow any kind of timeline. But that was a tangent. In the master plan, there's all kinds of ideas for skiing on the slopes, horseback riding, a cinema, kayaking, which they already are doing. So there are big grand plans for all kinds of activities. And we'll see.
So you're saying maybe not 30 years, but maybe 50 years.
I mean, thinking how long Central Park took to become Central Park, right? And then it went through its own challenges of losing a lot of funding and shanty towns springing up in it, So I think city projects, they're so expensive, and so slow, other than when Robert Moses was doing things. And so it could be a while. So the North Park is a great example. It's 22 acres with bird watching platforms and a little loop to bike or hike on. And it's low key. It's not like Domino Park with big playground equipment, things like that. It's for bird watching and spending a quiet afternoon. So that's, in terms of a representation of what is actually open, that's what it is,
Wow, like 2,200 acres with no trees.
Yeah.
Bizarre. Like, it will always feel like this surreal landscape.
Yeah, it's very surreal. Yeah.
Have you photographed any portraits of the people who are working there?
Not yet, no.
Do you plan to?
I've been kind of going back and forth about that. On one hand, that would make things very obvious. On one hand, it would make things very obvious. These are the people who did the park, right? And on the other hand, I have all of their hands and their work and their materials in the pictures. So it's something I fluctuate between all the time. So stay tuned. On the other hand, these are the people who orchestrated a massive transformation, right? So yes, to be determined.
How's the Power Broker?
It's really good, although now I'm getting stuck in page 400.
I watched the documentary about the writer and the editor.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it is an amazing book in terms of just, showing the machinations of how the city operates. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah.
It's more about like their funny relationships. It's sort of a side note that we also.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, it's a amazing book though. Yeah. Any
Are you
other?
optimistic that this sort of project could be replicated in other places, or do you think this is something that's uniquely, New York?
I think it's extremely optimistic. And because it's such a huge site, many parks around or many aspiring landfill transformation sites have studied, talked to, engaged with engineers on the site because it's so large. A lot of, these things that you're seeing, such as, hold on. A lot of the engineering you see on the site has been designed for Freshkills and has never been designed for anywhere else or at this scale. So it's quite a learning tool for many, many different other sites around the planet. Yeah. Any other questions?
Just one question, is that, there's that road that runs between, Socrates and Catskill, where there's that crazy big green, like hill, even in the middle of winter, it's like bright green. Yeah, it's like north, I was just wondering if you knew about, like, I think it's a former landfill that they've like it stays green because it's like all the heat.
Ooh.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's breathing.
They used to say it's always spring around the sewer.
No. Probably there are quite a few decommissioned landfills in upstate New York, in mid-Hudson, in Croton, the Croton Point Park, that's a landfill as well. So there are quite a few up here. Yeah. Freshkills is so huge, it's kept me busy, but there are quite a number of them.
Is this only possible here because it wasn't like a toxic landfill? I imagine if it was more for like toxic dump, that'd be different than just like household food and furniture and stuff, right?
Yes, and in I think of the Meadowlands as kind of a sister site. Meadowlands, of course, is 60,000 acres, and they have dumped radioactive materials in those marshes and toxic things. And so some of it has been turned into little parks, but I think on a grander scale, it probably would be just too dangerous. So yes, that is a reason. But even without toxic materials in here, one of the reasons it's going to take so long to open is because it's a really strict regulation process to open up any portion of a decommissioned landfill. So it has to go through a really rigorous safety protocol process through the EPA and the DEP to make sure it is safe for the public. So that is another reason it will be a long time to make sure everything is as safe as can be. Yeah. Yes.
Where does the trash go now?
Yes, that's a great question. So, and this is funny because my father and his wife and I were talking about the project, and I just started, and I was really enthusiastic. And they live in Pennsylvania, and she said, "So what? So now we get your trash." So that's one place, but it goes to the Carolinas. So now essentially all of the city's garbage is barged and trucked out to other states. Not a great solution, clearly.
Can I get that?
Yeah.
Do you use a digital reader for your 4x5 cameras?
That's a great question. So I'm shooting film. I have brought in a digital camera the last few years as well. So I'm shooting with a digital Hasselblad and the 4x5. So yeah, I would say right now the archive is about 75% film 4x5. Yeah. Any other last questions?
What do you hope for, like, and then you're calling it an archive, which I think is really interesting, but also where do you see after your 10-year residency, like, where do you see these images, like, what would be your goal for this? Is it a book? Is it a permanent installation here?
That would be an interesting idea. Yeah, I am starting to work on the book very loosely with goals of 2026 publication. We'll see. And yeah, I mean, I think just exhibiting the work a lot and talking about the work has really opened up a lot of interesting conversations about what this site represents, because it's kind of a giant metaphor in a lot of ways for all kinds of things. And so, yeah, just I love exhibiting the pictures because people are just so confounded by what they're seeing. Like, what? This is New York. This is Staten Island. This is Freshkills. There's so many layers to what they're seeing. So yeah, just continuing to share the work as widely as possible, open up conversations, and yeah, book, definitely.
Thank you, Jade.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.